Hello, everyone. My name is Derek Rosenbach. I am the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA Program Manager for the Rocky Mountain region of the U.S. General Services Administration, commonly known as GSA. GSA would like to welcome you to this public meeting for the proposed implementation of energy conservation measures at the Denver Federal Center. GSA has drafted an environmental assessment, or an EA, for the project in accordance with the requirements of NEPA. Thank you for taking the time to participate in tonight's virtual meeting, and we welcome your feedback on the proposed project. If you require closed captioning, please click the Show Captions button on the bottom of your screen. Tonight's meeting will include a presentation by GSA, followed by a question and answer session, or Q&A. Your microphones will remain muted during this time. You may post your questions and comments in the Q&A box in Zoom during the meeting. We have included a graphic on this slide that illustrates how to post a comment in the Q&A box, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Please only use the chat feature for requesting technical assistance. We will also provide instructions on how to send additional comments to us toward the end of the meeting. Lastly, please note that this meeting is being recorded and will be retained in the project's decision file. Attendees must accept being recorded in order to remain in the meeting. We will be covering several topics tonight, including an overview of the NEPA process and its schedule, the project alternatives, potential environmental impacts of those alternatives, and next steps for the project. As mentioned previously, my name is Derek Rosenbach, and I am leading the NEPA planning process for the project. Clay Weiland, GSA's project manager, is also presenting with me tonight. Don Schilling, Senior Project Manager with Potomac Hudson Engineering, is also with us tonight. Other GSA and Potomac Hudson staff are attending the meeting, but will not be presenting. In carrying out our responsibilities under NEPA, GSA is committed to ensuring we consider the overall quality of the environment and provide the public an opportunity to review the findings of the draft EA. The public provided initial input on the project during the scoping period in mid-November 2023. The overall purpose of tonight's meeting is to present the potential environmental impacts of the proposed project and request your input. So, what exactly is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA? NEPA is a procedural law intended to ensure federal agencies consider the environmental impacts of their actions in the decision-making process. There are three general phases to NEPA planning. First, development of a proposal. Second, an environmental analysis, or where we are now. And third, project implementation. Each of these phases often include public involvement. Furthermore, NEPA requires GSA to prepare an EA to consider whether a proposed action may result in significant impacts on the environment. If an EA determines that the project may result in significant impacts that cannot be avoided through mitigation measures, then a more rigorous analysis, such as an environmental impact statement, is conducted. If no significant impacts are identified, a finding of no significant impact is often executed. Typically, the finding of no significant impact is an agency's decision to implement a project. In addition to NEPA, compliance activities under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, and other applicable laws and regulations are being conducted concurrently. With respect to the National Historic Preservation Act, GSA must identify any historic or cultural resources the project would potentially affect and determine how the project can mitigate or avoid any adverse effects to those resources. With respect to the Endangered Species Act, GSA must consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to ensure that the project will not jeopardize the continued existence of threatened or endangered species or result in the adverse modification of critical wildlife habitat. We are currently in the public review period for the draft EA. During this time, the public is encouraged to provide comments on the analysis contained in the document. The public review period for the draft EA will end on April 5th, 2024. At that time, GSA and the project team will likely move forward with the development of the final EA and a decision document. GSA plans to release the final EA and decision document for public review for 30 days in May of 2024. The final EA will incorporate substantive public and stakeholder comments received on the draft. I'll now turn the presentation over to Clay Weiland, GSA's project manager, who will provide project overview, discuss the purpose of and need for action, and present the project alternatives that have been analyzed in the draft EA. Clay?
Thank you, Derek. Denver Federal Center, or DFC, is located approximately 8 miles west of Denver, Colorado, along US Route 6 in the city of Lakewood. The DFC is a campus that encompasses approximately 570 acres and houses about 6,000 federal employees from 30 different agencies across several buildings, totaling nearly 4 million square feet of rentable space, of rentable office, laboratory, and warehouse space. Government operations began at the DFC in the 1940s, and the site has historically relied on energy that is generated from non-renewable sources such as natural gas. 2 historic buildings are located within the DFC. The Office of Civil Defense Emergency Operations Center, or OCD, was built in 1961 and was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1999 for its association with the Cold War. The OCD was constructed as a temporary structure until a more permanent bunker could be completed as a Quonset-style bunker, partially buried underground, and was intended to provide protection in the event of a foreign attack. GSA installed interpretive signage along the OCD and to educate employees and visitors to the DFC of its historical significance. The other historic building, Building 710, is built underground and is designed to slightly withstand a blast. Is designed to withstand a blast. Constructed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and completed in 1969, Building 710 was a base for federal operations to be expected to be performed by the Defense Civil Preparedness Agency in the event of a foreign attack. On August 2nd, 2000, the concrete and steel structure, largely concealed below an earthen berm, was listed on the National Register of Historic Places for its association with the Cold War. How its design and construction reflected this era, as well as its continuous national preparedness and response function. The purpose of this project is to decarbonize and electrify the DFC using on-site renewable energy generation and electrification solutions. To achieve this, GSA would install a geothermal heat pump system and a solar panel system to supply year-round heating and cooling and electric power. These systems, along with other energy conservation measures, would replace approximately 90% of fossil fuel consumption on campus and allow for self-generated solar panels to electrify approximately half the campus. The proposed project is needed to cut DFC grid purchased energy use by approximately 65% and water usage by approximately 29%. This project will allow GSA to reduce its carbon footprint and become less dependent on non-renewable energy sources. The proposed project would modernize infrastructure on the DFC, reduce life cycle operating costs, and mitigate risk associated with future fossil fuel price volatility. Let's transition to a discussion of the project alternatives that are analyzed in the draft EA. GSA is currently conducting an investment grade audit for the project, which is a detailed account of energy and water use at the DFC. Based on the recommendations contained in the investment grade audit, 2 action alternatives are proposed in the draft EA, a centralized option and a decentralized option. Under both action alternatives, a ground-mounted solar panel system would be in a location shown on the white with a white line on the figure to your right. For the centralized alternative, one geothermal bore field of approximately 2,880 boreholes would be co-located on the ground-mounted with the ground-mounted solar panel system. The piping network, shown by the black and white hashed line on the figure, would be located through a geotechnical screening process to minimize environmental impacts to soils and water resources. Disturbance to some existing parking lots and a few on-campus roadways would occur while constructing the pipeline network and while repaving areas. Similar to the centralized alternative, the solar panel system would be the same under this decentralized alternative, shown to the right. This alternative would utilize multiple geothermal bore fields, strategically located to minimize piping distance to buildings that they would support, minimizing heat and pumping losses. Approximately 2,805 boreholes would be required to be placed under existing parking lots, which would require demolition and repaving of each lot. The solar panel system would provide 14 megawatts of new electricity to the DFC. To achieve this, GSA proposes to install a ground-mounted solar panel system in the southeast field of the campus, adjacent to the corner of West Alameda Avenue and Kipling Street. Up to 27 acres of already cleared land would be utilized. The geothermal system would use underground closed-loop ground source heat pumps. These systems circulate water and propylene glycol solution, through high-density plastic tubes that are buried underground. Borings for the closed-loop system would be done by a state-certified and licensed driller in accordance with geothermal well regulations and guidelines. Typical closed-loop geothermal systems consist of 6-inch vertical and horizontal boreholes, and a heat exchanger would transfer the heat between the refrigerant in the heat pump and the propylene glycol solution in the piping. The high-density plastic tubing would be sealed airtight. A bentonite grout plug would be used to case the boreholes from the bottom to the top. The loops would be pressure tested, and before and after installation, and be filled with a potable water from the DFC's existing domestic water system. The system would not extract or come into contact with surface or groundwater. Aside from the potable water initially used to fill the loops, the system is non-consumptive of water resources over the long term. Under both action alternatives, a handful of additional energy conservation measures would be implemented, primarily within the existing building envelopes or campus infrastructure. These measures may include optimization of building automation systems, replacement of existing windows, and use of supplemental window panes using low-embodied carbon glass, improvements to HVAC systems, installation of efficient motors and variable frequency drives, electrification of domestic water heating, and the installation of new high-efficiency transformers. GSA is also assessing an alternative to take no action and therefore not construct the project. Under the no action alternative, the solar panel system, geothermal system, and other energy conservation measures would not be built, and current energy conditions at the DFC would remain. Energy needs would continue to be purchased from the grid, which are largely from non-renewable sources such as natural gas. I'll now turn the presentation back to Derek for discussion of resources that have been evaluated in the draft EA and a summary of potential environmental impacts. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Clay. The draft EA provides detailed descriptions of the existing condition of natural, cultural, and other resources found on the DFC. It also analyzes the adverse and beneficial effects the proposed project would have on those resources. The table on this slide summarizes the potential adverse effects identified in the draft EA. The table uses coded circles to help one visualize the anticipated level of impact to each resource. Green circles indicate a negligible to minor impact that would likely be short-term. The yellow circles indicate a minor to moderate impact that would likely also be short-term, but could be long-term in some instances. Red and horizontal dashed circles indicate a moderate to major short or long-term impact. However, No such impacts were identified in the draft DA. As shown here, adverse impacts to most resources will be negligible to minor, or those green circles. Minor to moderate impacts are largely due to short-term construction-related disturbances. More detail on these impacts are contained in Chapter 3 of the draft DA. The draft DA also identified which resources would benefit from implementation of the action alternatives. The project would have a beneficial effect on air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions because there would be less utilization of fossil fuels such as natural gas to heat the buildings on campus. The reliance on cooling towers, which are designed to remove excess heat from a building through evaporative processes, would also be minimized through the use of the new geothermal system. This, in turn, would help reduce domestic water consumption at the DFC. During construction, short-term beneficial impacts on socioeconomics are also anticipated, as the project would temporarily increase construction jobs and construction-related spending in the area. A number of mitigation measures would be required during project implementation to reduce impacts on resources. These measures include reseeding disturbed areas immediately upon completion of construction to minimize soil erosion and sediment runoff, using construction equipment that is properly maintained and fitted with standard noise reduction devices, minimizing fugitive dust from the construction site, and several other measures. Table 21 in the draft DA provides the full details of proposed minimization measures, and those measures are summarized briefly on this slide. At this time, we anticipate a final decision on the project and its proposed alternatives in May of 2024. As noted earlier, if GSA concludes the NEPA process with a finding of no significant impact, the project would be implemented. Construction would then be anticipated to start later this year and take about 2 years to complete. Following tonight's meeting, the public review period for the draft DA will remain open until April 5th, 2024. Instructions for submitting comments during this period will be provided momentarily. Once all comments are received, the project team will review the comments and incorporate substantive information as applicable into the final EA. This public review period provides you with the opportunity to comment on the project and the impact analysis provided in the draft EA. There are several avenues for you to submit your comments. To provide written comments, you may physically or electronically mail them to GSA at the addresses listed here. We ask that you include the subject line DFC ECM's EA. Written comments must be postmarked or received electronically by April 5th, 2024 to be accepted. Please note that all public comments received on the project will be included in the project record or decision file. A copy of tonight's presentation will also be posted to the link shown on your screen. GSA invites you to participate during this Q&A session. To send us a comment or question, please type and submit in the Q&A window in Zoom. As a reminder, please only use the chat box feature to submit technical questions. GSA will clarify anything that was discussed in the presentation with respect to the project itself, NEPA planning process, the proposed alternatives, the resources analyzed, or other opportunities for public participation. Any other questions that were not answered during the Q&A will be considered during the development of the final EA, and again, will be included in the decision file. This concludes our formal presentation, and we will now begin the Q&A session.